So we'll go for a quick tour of the engine bay. Obviously it's the 1G engine, so that's a straight 6, 2 litre, double overhead cam, 24 valve. It only has a single pulley on the front, and the cams are gear driven obviously, so you've got a single pulley, kind of like the Starlet, driving one of the cams, and there's a gear to gear to drive the other cam off of the first cam. It's split into 2 banks for the exhaust, bank 1 and bank 2. It has 2 catalytic converters here and a third one underneath as well, and that includes 3 oxygen sensors, so 1 in each manifold and 1 after the cat for cat health or whatever it is. Yeah, that's about it really. It's not the most powerful thing. It's like 155 horsepower I believe. So basically it's got the power of a 1.8 and the fuel economy of a 2.5, so that's a win for everyone that bought one of these, I guess. It did originally have a whole bunch of beautification nonsense on it, so there was like a sort of plasticky rubber cover over here that said vvti to cover up all of the wiring loom and all that sort of stuff, but it hardened up and basically gone so crispy that every time you touched it, chunks of it would snap off. And the last thing you want is like bits of plastic roaming around in the engine bay when you're trying to work on stuff and might fall in the engine or whatever. So I've deleted on that. And also on this side, there's some sort of plastic cover that hides the alternator, so it makes the engine look a bit less like an engine, which is the last thing I want. I like an engine to be obvious and easily accessible. So I've ripped off all the nonsense I didn't need. This is the air filter box, and obviously the air filter is in here. We'll change that later. It's probably horrifically grey. The car has got full service history up to about 72,000 miles. That's with a genuine Lexus service history with a dealer. So the first guy that owned this cared about his car, and it was probably a lease car or business car or something. So either way, that went there and got full service history. Then another 2 or 3 owners owned it, and there is no service history for the last 50,000 miles, which is why we're here today. So yeah, first things first is we're going to check the coolant, or swap the coolant, because I've already looked in here and basically I don't believe it's actually coolant at all. I think it's just straight water. There is absolutely zero sort of slippery feel to that. And if we get ourselves a piece of rag and dip it in here, it should be Toyota red coolant, or may have been changed to pink coolant at some point, but as you can see on that, that is completely clear. There's no pigment in that at all. And when you rub it on your hands and let it dry, it doesn't feel slippery or slimy, which is what coolant should feel like. So I don't believe there's very much, if any, coolant in here, and it certainly doesn't smell like ethylene glycol should. So I've got myself some genuine Toyota red coolant, which is pre-mixed, genuine Toyota stuff. There's 2 different types of coolant, red or pink. Red is for older stuff, and the more modern stuff is 080, which is pink. Apparently I phoned Lexus, or phoned Toyota, and they said this could go on the pink stuff. The handbook I've got with this, the genuine owner's manual from 2002 when this was made, calls for Toyota long life coolant. And long life coolant is the red stuff, not the pink stuff, which I think is extra long life or super long life. So what we're going to do is, as always, there's under tray, so I'll pop the under tray off. There is a drain on the rad and the block. Can't find the one on the block, it's somewhere in there, and I really can't be bothered to find it today. So we're going to do it well, we're going to go cheap early basically. We're going to rip the bottom hose off of the rad, dump out the coolant, which I believe is just, I mean, literally, it's just water. Then we're going to put it all back together, fill the rad up with coolant, heat cycle it so it at least mixes around the engine with that. I should flush it out with demineralised water and all this stuff, because you can't have tap water and coolant, but it's heading into winter now, and the last thing I want is for this thing to freeze, because the previous dickhead owner didn't even put coolant in the thing and just use water. Okie dokie, so this is the overflow tank. It's not a header tank, it's not pressurised, because the access gap to it to fill it up is just a clip-on one. There's no resistance, so that's not pressurized. You can tell because the pressure cap is on the rad, not on the overflow bowl, so that's the difference on that one. This is obviously just full of water as well, so we're going to drain this off, because obviously when this gets hot, pushes up on the valve and the overflow feeds it into this tank, and then when it cools down, it sucks it back in again. So whip that off quickly. So the under tray's off, or the not so fun under tray. It's held on with these 10mm hex sort of big self-tapper things. You can reach all of them, thankfully, without having to jack the car up, so that's good, because there's two under trays, one right back where the cross member is, and this one at the front. So I whipped all of those out. It's got, for some reason, it's got this weird sort of sound deadening sort of material on it as well, which is just unnecessary weight, and that gets soaked in oil. I should think that might become a bit flammable, but yeah, just for fun, I found another piece of that top cover I was talking about that broke up and turned to dust. That was just on there with the rest of it. So yeah, that's off. Now we can start draining stuff. Judging by the state of what came out of it. There you go. Looks like bath water after you've been playing football for an hour or two. So yeah, there you go. That doesn't really look very coolant-y to me. So there we go, slowly draining out now. It's dumped the radiator, and obviously the thermostat is in here in the housing, and that has what's known as a jiggle pin in it. So it's got like a little, basically it's like almost like a little valvey thing, but what that does is obviously it allows you to bleed the system a bit more easily by when you squeeze the hoses, it pumps coolant through and lets airlocks through. But thankfully now we've popped that hose, obviously it's going to now drain the system down to sort of that level. So we're probably going to end up draining down to this level of the block, which should hopefully empty the heater core, because the heater core's up here, which is the highest point by the look of it. And then we've got yeah, the thermostat itself there letting through a tiny dribble of water. So basically I think the only thing that's going to have water left in it is the block. The rest of it, the head should have drained down. So we'll carry on letting that trickle away, then we'll put it all back together and wang some red in it. Yeah, and as you can see, that's clearly just plain water, absolutely useless. What I like to do as well is I'll pour it into an old bucket I've got, so at least I know how much came out, so I know what I should be getting back in the system as well. So I've poured the water that came out of the cooling system back into this old coolant bottle I had, and we're about 3.5 to 4 litres I think, so we're probably about half the capacity emptied out of the engine like I wanted. So it's a 7 litre system apparently, so at least I know that it should be nearly 1 bottle goes back in without any airlock sort of thing. So yeah, that's all that. The hoses are back on and everything, so we'll top her up with coolant, squeeze the hoses a bit, get that pumping round, and then start her up and let it go. So yeah, not going to be too exciting this bit, but I'll give you a shout when it's all done. So I'm just going to warm it up now, let it get up to temperature. I've parked the car sort of slightly downhill to try and raise this up, because you really want this to be the highest point of the system. To try and make sure you get all the water to go around the heater circuit at the top. Sometimes if you really get stuck, you can actually pull the hose off the heater core, and with the engine off and everything cold, you can actually fill it with coolant from the top, because that's kind of the highest point. So you almost use that top hose here. You can pop this off and fill it with coolant if you're having trouble. So it's going to take 10 or 15 minutes for this to warm up. We'll let that go. When the thermostat opens, it'll all run round. You have to be careful obviously, because you've got the cap off here, and hot coolant, if that explodes up and covers you in hot coolant, that's a real bad day. So what I'm going to do is let this go. I'm going to put the camera down because I need to concentrate, but you get the idea. Okie doke, so time to change the cabin filter, which is hidden behind the glove box. So there's some sort of stops here that clip in behind part of the dash, so you just have to sort of squeeze them in and then pull it down. Squeeze that one, pull that one down. It sort of flips out of the way. Then in here we've got ourselves the air conditioning or heater unit. So yeah, this piece here says up on it, so you just sort of pull on the tabs, cover comes off. And then obviously this little tray thing here, Toyota Denso up, slide that out, and then we have the horror show that is the cabin filter. So there we go, as we expected, nice and black and full of leaves and God knows what else, but at least there was a filter in it. Sometimes there isn't even one in it. So the part number I've got is ADT 32502. So there it is, all loaded in, And like I said, this one does have airflow written on it with an arrow, so at least we know which way the heater flows. At the end of the day, you can't get it in backwards because the filter element there sticks up proud, and you would end up getting stuck on there, but that sort of tells you which way it's going to flow, because obviously if the air's blowing that way, so the air's blowing that way, and that's why this mesh is here to stop it pushing the filter through. So if it's pushing that way, just simply push away from it. So anyway, there we go. It's ready to go back in now. Also found this piece of like foam sponge sealer thing that I think fell off of this when I dropped it earlier. Have no idea where that goes, so we're just going to ignore that. Make sure there's nothing stuck in the heater box and just wang this puppy back in. So the intake manifold has an ACIS feature, or ACIS, which is obviously has two different length paths on it. Obviously it has a short and long runner, and there's a vacuum solenoid underneath that's actuated by an electronic valve. So when it gets to about 4,500 RPM, it switches from the long runners to the short runners, because as we know, long runners are good for low down torque and short runners are good for top end power. So that's why there's a kick, a sort of 4,500 RPM. It's not actually the VVT. VVT on this is variable valve timing, and that's sort of happening constantly, doing its own thing basically according to whatever the ECU tells it. But it's not like lift, it's only valve angle, or cam angle should I say, whereas the ACIS is obviously this step of performance increase you feel at about 4,500. Some people say to disable the ACIS feature by popping off one of the hoses or something and then blocking up the hoses, but at the end of the day, Toyota spent thousands of pounds and months of work developing the system for this. It's not just like, oh yeah, just pull that off and it'll be faster, which always seems a bit weird to me when people dick around with stuff like that. But there may come a point where we can actually switch it, because it's just controlled by an electronic valve, and the Det3 computer can actually control that as an on-off valve. And I think it could do it as PWM as well through a PWM table, but I don't think it fluctuates, it's just on or off. So there may come a point where switching it at a lower or higher RPM may be beneficial, we don't know, but certainly just disabling it is a pretty crap idea. So anywho, won't be able to see any of that till we do the oil filter, because if you pull the oil filter out of the way, you can actually see the VSV valve and the sort of vacuum operated valve that actually does the moving of the bits. So it's time for an oil change, so I'm going to let the engine warm up a bit just to help get the oil to flow a bit better and collect as much of the crap from the top end of the engine as I can before we send it out into the drain pan at the bottom. I've also got some Miller's fully synthetic Eco 5W30, which is what's specified for this apparently, and a Blueprint oil filter ADT 32108. So apparently that's a bit of a pig to get to, and we've got to jack the car up and everything, but I'll let this warm up quickly, then grab the oil pan and carry on with that. So yeah, 14mm gets that off. It's not going to get everything out of the pan because, again, that's higher than the drain rather than it being on the bottom. For some reason, Toyota seemed to put them on the side, but even jacking the car up, you never get the last bit of it out. But we'll let it drain, get the rest of it out. And like I said, 14mm to undo that one. It looks like the last genius used either an O-ring or some silicone sealant or something instead of a crush washer, but yeah, we'll figure that out. There may be a crush washer still stuck on it, we'll see what that is, or that could well just be the threaded insert sort of welded in the pan, but either way, I'm sure I've got a copper washer. But yeah, that's definitely not what's supposed to be in there as far as I'm aware. And I like to, even though it's got like a PCV and a breather, obviously I like to just undo the cap and leave the cap off, because that way air can get in the top and it helps it drain a bit quicker. So we'll let that keep going until it just starts coming out as a drip, basically. And yeah. Yeah, and as we can see, it was the crush washer stuck on the side of the sump. So yeah, I just picked it with my finger and now it's fell off in the oil. So we had the original crush washer on it and some sort of sealant up the middle for whatever reason. So hopefully Toyota use the same ones as they do for the Starlet. I mean, at the end of the day, it's an old sump plug. Why would you change the size of it? So these are the ones for the Starlet. I'm not sure if this is the right one for the part number for this, but at the end of the day, we've got a whole bunch of different crush washers, aluminium and copper, including a whole set there. But yeah, funnily enough, the Toyota ones slip straight on, same outside diameter, inside diameter. So there we go. Bought a pack of 10 of those. I mean, they're only cheap, so why not? But there you go. That's ready to go back on when it's finished dripping. Okie dokes, oil filter time. I've already disconnected the oil level sender, and now we've got to take out this brace here because the oil filter is just up there hiding behind it somewhere in this void. Can't really get any tools on it, so disconnect the electrical plug there, and there it is in all its glory. So I did say I'd show you the bottom of the intake manifold for the AKIS. So there you can see the actuator, the vacuum actuator, push rod that changes the length of the runners, or the length of the inlet anyway. And somewhere at the back there, that's the electronic valve that controls it with the pipes. So yep, I'll get the oil filter off and we'll carry on from there. So the new filter's in, half filled it with oil before I screwed it on. Couldn't fill it all the way with oil, otherwise it would have just poured down the block, because obviously the filter is horizontal onto the side of it. So yeah, tightened that up till it touched, then screwed it on about half, just over half a turn to 3/4 is about all it would do. So yeah, that's all on there, nice and squashed up. Yeah, so I'll put it all back together and chuck some oil in it. So yeah, on this side, the intake manifold mounts, the bolts to hold those in there, 12mm hex, and it was 18.5 newtons, which I could do on the bottom one because the torque wrench actually fitted. But higher up, the one at the top I had to do with the spanner, so you just give it a nice firm nip up. Don't go nuts with it, because at the end of the day the manifold's plastic and it's got a brass insert moulded into it, so you don't really want to be rounding that off. And on the other side we've got the sump plug, and that was 37.5 newtons, I believe it was. So just topping it up now, and I've got about 3.5 litres in at the moment. Apparently it's 4 litres to fill it, and so far I've just started it and run it at 3.5, and obviously just to fill up the oil filter that was only half full. I'm going to let it drain down while I tidy up my tools. But one thing I always do is, it may sound like a bit of an old wives' tale, but what you should always do is, once the engine oil's been sitting for a while or been in transit and you've let it sit down, sometimes some of the additives can settle out of suspension and end up in the bottom. So I always shake it. So you need to shake the bottle and agitate it and turn it upside down and back up again to make sure you've mixed up all of the good additives for the whole of the oil, rather than if you're just sort of topping up every now and again, all you'll be doing is pouring in the oil and sort of all of the anti-wear additives may have separated out into the bottom. Believe it or not, oil does have a shelf life as well, which is why they always have like a manufacture date on them. So yeah, just a little tip for you there as well. So I'll carry on filling this up. So yeah, double check the oil. I'm just up to the maximum there, tiny bit over now, it's all sunk back down again, so yeah, that's plenty. This is obviously the VVTi solenoid, and that bolts into this part. This banjo bolt here is the feed of oil from the oil gallery down on the side of the block, comes up this tube. It's kind of like a turbo oil feed, but inside here, this is the banjo bolt that feeds the oil in, and there's a mesh sort of gauze filter here. So being as we've changed the other oil filter, we might as well whip this out. It is a serviceable item. You can sort of pull it off, give it a clean through, and as long as it hasn't gone rusty and sort of like closed up the holes in the mesh, you should be okay to reuse it. So we're going to take that out, see what condition it's in, clean that out, and make sure that the VVTi valve is getting the full flow and pressure of oil and it's not restricted by the mesh. So we'll pop that out and give it a bit of a clean, I think. So apparently this is a 22mm, which is very weird, but there we go. And there's no filter on the end of mine, so it's either stuck up there or it's been deleted. So that's interesting. And don't forget there's 2 crush washers, one on either side of the banjo. So you do need two, one under the bolt head and one in between the two. So there we go. Well, I'm going to go have a little look up there and a fish around in there. You won't be able to see anything apart from my head getting in the way, so I'll report back with my findings. Success. He was in there. Managed to stick a set of needle nose pliers up it and just grab it on one of the little legs that's supposed to clip in. But yeah, that doesn't look particularly good to me, judging by all of this garbage that's on it. So yeah, bit of luck really. That's pretty horrific. So from what I can tell, the oil comes up the bolt and then goes up the arse end of this, so it's actually filtering sort of inside to outside. So the outside should be relatively free of the shrapnel. But yeah, we'll stick it on the bench and give it a quick spray out and see what comes out of it, I guess. Always remember to use this in a well ventilated area. There we go. Just open the door so we don't pass out. The good thing is the mesh seems to be intact. There's no holes or anything in it. It's just the yeah, the little clips are a bit crap. They're supposed to obviously clip in the end of the bolt, and like I say, that's loose as anything in there. So, and you always hold it by the plastic thing. If you don't squeeze it on the mesh, because it'll just squash the mesh in. But yeah, not too bad to retrieve, and I'm guessing that end piece is to stop it going in too far or something if it does come adrift. But 10 times better than it was. It doesn't really show it too badly on there, but you can see a whole bunch of grit and stuff, so that was definitely not helping flow. It certainly wasn't clagged up solid or anything, but yeah, it's definitely going to cause a bit of a restriction, that. So glad I did it, not too bad. Got my new copper washer on there, and I've got the other one already ready to go in on the other side. So yeah, let's drop this back in now. Hopefully it won't fall off too many times as I'm trying to put it in there. So it's back in now. Copper washer either side. The torque setting for this is 64.5 newtons. This only goes to about 60 odd, so I think that'll do for today. So we'll just wang that up there. And this is a 22mm socket I went out and bought, but yeah, there we go. 60 newtons. Spark plug time. So I've noticed that if I'd leave the car for perhaps 4 or 5 days and not drive it, that when I started it the next time, there'd be a sort of puff of white smoke out the back. So I thought, hang on a minute, I need to sort of investigate that. So I thought, I'll take the spark plugs out because they should, you know, at least tell me what's going on in the cylinders themselves. And sure enough, when I pulled them out, they were a little bit oily at the top. It's nothing too serious. So we're just going to kind of ignore it for the minute, because it's not like it does it every time I start it. It's only if I leave it for like 5 to 6 days, then start it, it does a little puff of smoke. But if I start it the next day, it doesn't do any smoke at all. So it can't be too serious in my mind, so we're going to ignore that. The problem was when I came to take out spark plug number 5, it was basically stuck in there. I could only perhaps get a quarter of a turn on it, and then a quarter of a turn back, and it was feeling really stiff and starting to bind. So basically I was a bit sort of upset that perhaps it had got rust on the other end of it. Maybe it was leaking water or something, but I thought at the end of the day I've got to get it out, because if I turbo this, which I'm probably going to, you're going to need to put a different range of spark plugs in it, and plus you need to be able to service it anyway. So finally got that one out, essentially by turning it sort of a quarter of a turn at a time till it got tight, and then turning it back, then putting it sort of in the middle, spraying a bit of WD-40 around it and watching that sort of soak down in, leaving it for 10 or 15 minutes. I actually went and had lunch and then came back out, and I managed to get it so it was doing basically like a half turn at a time either way, and I could get near enough a full rotation and a half. And then I thought, well, the old trick as well is to heat it up. So I started the engine, let it warm up for 5 minutes, because obviously aluminium expands faster than steel does. So that helped perhaps bring the threads away from the spark plug. So I was able to unscrew it and get it out quite easily after that. So I wish I'd have done that earlier, but I only did perhaps one turn with it being tight in there. But yeah, I mean, as far as you can see on this camera, I mean, I'll chuck a picture in, but you can see right at the very end here, this thread is damaged. I'll put a picture in now so you can see a close-up of it. But the frustrating thing is that part would be in the head and covered up, because, you know, only sort of that part of it sticks into the combustion chamber. So it's not like anything in the engine's hit it, which is perhaps good news for the sort of state of the engine inside. But that also means that whoever fitted this fitted it perhaps with that damage on it. I can't think how it would have got damaged in there. So someone sent that in with a giant breaker bar or something. So I'm hoping there's at least half of the threads left in the head. So went to Eurocar Parts and got a replacement. So IFR 6T11 NGK laser iridium. Yeah, and 11 is obviously the electrode gap, 1.1 mil. These, you don't regap these, you're not supposed to play with them, as it says on the back, you just leave it as it is and put it in the engine. Yeah, the frustrating thing was as well, while I was there, the first one I got, I came back and checked it, and then when I took it out of the packet, it had oil on the threads, and the crush washer on it had already been compressed. So someone had fitted it to an engine, then taken it back out. They hadn't run it because there was no soot on it, but they'd then taken it back out and returned it and got their money back, because these are like 13 or 14 quid each. So if you've got 6 of them for this, you're looking at the best part of 80 quid. So yeah, basically someone had done that. I went to the shop to return it, and they said, oh, here you go, here's another one. I pulled that out of the packet, and sure enough, that one had been fitted and returned as well. And they said, oh, it's in the same box. I said, well, have you got any out of a different box? So they gave me this one, which I checked in the shop, and sure enough, this one is actually brand new and has never been fitted to an engine. So we're going to put it in number 5, and if all goes well, we'll have a usable engine again. If not, we're going to be doing a lot more work on this, but bear with me while I set you up on the tripod. Spark plug went back in okay. The threads didn't feel great, but it torqued up to what it should do, and we're just going to keep our eye on it for next time, I guess. But yeah, that's in now and tightened down, so we'll just go with that being okay for the minute. Might as well do the air filter while we got the box off, because that way we can sort of hoover it out. Obviously this is the air filter element in here. Once you take this little cartridge thing out, it's in there, and obviously the intake for the throttle body's on this side. So the air comes in here through this box and then sideways through there. So when it's off, obviously there'll be a whole bunch of leaves and debris and crap in here, so don't really want to tip it that way, because then it'll all end up in the wrong side of the box past the filters. So now it's off, pointing at this side, we can take the filter out, and as you can see, it's pretty disgusting, as we'd expect it to be for a car that I bought. So that's that one. Goes in this side, obviously. Pop that one out. Yeah, and there's tons of wildlife and farmer's field hay and God knows what trapped in that, but it did its job, that's what it's for. So God knows what's going on here. But I noticed that as well, the front of the car had a bunch of this like straw and hay in it, so I don't know what the guy was playing at, probably out dogging with Muriel perhaps. But yeah, either way, probably 50,000 miles old from the first owner probably. But yeah, there we go, so that goes in the bin. Going to hoover out the inside, get rid of all the crap out of there, and then chuck our new one in. The other cool little thing as well is, if you look in there, that's obviously where the throttle body attaches to on the underside, and it's got a nice bell mouth port going into it as well to help increase airflow. So yeah, a bit grotty in there. I'll give that a bit of a wipe out now, just on the filter side. There's no point cleaning the other side because that's where the unfiltered crap goes, so I'll just clean the middle bit and the other side, and then we'll be ready to chuck the new filter in. And yes, for some reason they've chosen to make it look like a penis and balls, but there you go, that's the shape of the filter. That's the new filter, all nice and clean. It just pushes into the little carriage there, and you just drop it in the top. There's some little metal spring clips in there that help it sort of push to one side and seal. You just gently push that down, snap one at the front, and there's a little over centre catch at the back. There you go, jobs are good.